Hi everybody, how you doing? So my name's Roan Lavery. I'm one of the co-founders. I'm the Chief Product Officer of FreeAgent. And today I want to talk to you about some of the lessons, the things I've learned over the past 11 years of starting and scaling up this business, FreeAgent. And this was, I'm not sure, I was at Turing Festival. I know Brian's kind of here. I was at Turing Festival a couple of years ago. I don't know if anybody else here was. And there was a really great talk by kind of like Rand Fishkin where he used this format, which I'm shamelessly going to kind of like steal today. And what he did was he talked about if he could go back in time and sort of like have his time all over again, what were things that you would do the same, things you would do differently, and some stuff that he wasn't quite sure about. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you one thing that I would do the same, one thing that I do differently, and one thing that I'm still not so entirely sure about. So if you don't know who kind of FreeAgent are, kind of Russell give a good introduction. So we make online accounting software for freelancers and micro businesses. We're based here in the UK. The company was formed in 2007 by myself and my two other co-founders, our CEO, Ed Molyneux, and our CTO, Ollie Heady. And so we've been around for a little while now. In total, we've raised about £15 million. I'm going to come back to that later on as one of my points, so I'll leave you to guess what category that's in. We've got around 68,000 kind of like paying customers, most of them in the UK. As Russell said, we do about just over 10 million in annual recurring revenue. Team size for the total company is about 140, and about half of those in P&E, which is product management, engineering, product design, sort of testing, user experience, all in the sort of product side of the company. Okay, so starting off with the one thing that I would do the same, and I'm sort of calling this lay the foundations. And what do I mean by this? Well, there's a lot of discussion in our industry about what it takes to build and scale a successful company. And you know, the one thing that you will hear time and time again, if you go along to these talks and meetups and things like that, is people say stuff like, well, hire smart people and get out of their way. Or, you know, I've been sort of involved with recruitment of some quite senior positions at FreeAgent over the last kind of week or so. And these are kind of leadership kind of levels, and people are coming in and we're saying, oh, how do you kind of like scale a company? One thing everybody says, give the teams autonomy. Everybody's like, just give them autonomy. And that's absolutely true. I absolutely kind of buy into that. There was a great talk by Mark Logan at the Turing Festival a couple of weeks ago, and he really sort of like talked about the key to ensuring your business retains its productivity as it grows is this ability to sort of maintain personal agency. That's the ability for the employees and staff to have a degree of personal effectiveness in the organization as it kind of grows. And I kind of buy into this completely. But there's one thing that I do know is that it's not simply enough to hire smart people and get out of the way. Because no matter how smart the people you hire are, they're not necessarily going to make the right decisions in a vacuum, okay? Now, even if they do make the right decisions sometimes, they're not consistently going to make the right decisions in a vacuum. And across the organization, there's no guarantee that everybody's going to be pointing in the same direction and making the right decisions that helps take the kind of like business forward. And this is really what I mean by laying the foundations. And so this is things like, you need to be able to give and set the context for your business. So that's like your background to your business, the marketplace, the economic conditions that you're in. You need to be able to explain that and clarify and communicate that to people. You need to be able to explain the direction of the business, both in terms of the strategy and also priorities. And you need to be able to explain expectations and resources. So what do people have available of them? What's expected of them? This is what I talk about in terms of laying the foundations. And without this stuff, you're asking people, even very, very smart people, to operate and make decisions in a vacuum. And that will not always work out for you. So the great thing about smart people is when you bring them on board to your company, they're curious, they have questions. So they're going to be asking things like, why do we exist? How will we succeed? What's important right now? How do we behave? And there's another one on here, which is like, well, how do I fit in? What's my role in all of this? And it's your ability as a leader or a founder of a business, their ability to answer these questions that sets the context, that gives the direction, that communicates expectations and resources that will help those very, very smart people go on and make the right decisions. So the answer to why do we exist, well, that's your company vision. The answer to how will we succeed, well, that's something called your strategic anchors. I'm going to touch on that in a second. Your answer to what's important right now, well, we use a framework at FreeAgent for planning and prioritization, which is called OKRs, objectives and key results. And the answer to how do we behave, well, that's our values as a business. That's kind of like what we believe in. And I'm going to touch on two of these, the strategic anchors and the value stuff. Now, just before I kind of get into this, a lot of these ideas come from this book, which is by Patrick Lencioni, called The Advantage. And if you're involved in starting or scaling a business, I highly recommend you take a look at this. This is effectively our leadership playbook at FreeAgent. So this is how a lot of how we run our company, the planning cycles, the cadence of it, how we defined our strategy, how we communicate the strategy, it was all pretty much lifted wholesale from this one book, okay? So it's had a massive impact on us as a business. And so if you've not read any of Patrick Lencioni's kind of like stuff, I highly recommend you take a look at it. So to touch on the stuff about strategic anchors, this is the, your strategic anchors are the answer to the question, how will we succeed? How will we win? And one way of thinking about this is like, what's unique about your business? What's different about your company compared to your competitors in terms of differentiation that's going to allow you to succeed and sort of and when they don't? And now these are our strategic anchors here. But the exact details of these aren't super important for you guys, okay? Because these are ours, and you can't have them. And even if you want them, they wouldn't apply to your business. And the fact is that you've got to go through the process to unearth these for your own companies. But the important thing is, once you've done this, what do you actually do with these things? Because there's no point just having them up on a slide, or even having them in a Google Doc somewhere, or even up on the wall as a sort of snazzy poster. The real value in this stuff comes when it becomes a resource and a tool every day for the people inside your company. So the way that strategic anchors work is effectively to help those smart people make decisions. When a team is faced with, do we go in this direction or do we go in this direction? It's going back to the strategic anchor that will help them make that decision. When they're faced with a choice over priorities, is to go back to the strategic anchor to help them make those decisions. And this is how you create clarity, and this is how you create alignment. So for example, our first one here, deliver growth by focusing on UK microbusinesses, their accountants and banks. So you can imagine a situation where, you know, maybe there's a kind of like product team and they're forced with a kind of decision that, some of our customers are asking for this more sort of like upmarket feature for like larger companies. You know, should we listen to those customers and build that particular feature? Well, the answer there would be no, because that's not what our strategic anchor says. Even though there's a vocal minority of customers asking for it, we stay true to our strategic anchors, and that gives us focus and it helps us prioritize. Or maybe, you know, you might even have investors and they're coming to us and saying, there's a huge market in the US, you know, you've got to be pushing into the US or overseas or something like that. Well, again, we'd be saying, actually, no, that's not what we're going to do right now, because our strategic anchor says that that's not a priority and a focus for the business. And so it's important that you revisit these. So it's important that you come back and you check in your strategic anchors periodically. They're not going to sort of like stay the same for forever. And we've been going through some pretty big changes in our business recently. So we're at a point where we're coming back and revisiting these strategic anchors. But when you've agreed on them and when you've communicated them to the business, they become this really important tool for allowing people to focus on what they do. The other side to that is not just about what we do, it's about how we behave, it's about how we treat each other. And you think about values in exactly the same way. Again, these are kind of our values kind of at FreeAgent. The exact details aren't important, but what's important is how they're used. So again, in the same way, we use these to drive action to help people make decisions across the business. So decisions like, should we hire this person or should we not? Because we think, well, is this person going to be sort of conducive to our values as a business? Do we fire somebody even? You know, are they not living up to the values? That's a more extreme one. And certainly everything like, so are there any issues in the business? Are people not getting on? There's sort of like, you know, HR issues or anything like that. All of that kind of sort of stuff gets referred back to and is informed by the values that we have, because it's about empowering those smart people to make the right decisions because they understand the context and the direction of the business. So I think we've done a pretty good job as a FreeAgent. It's incredibly difficult, and it's something that gets harder and harder as the business grows, and you know the amount of communication you need to do needs to increase exponentially in order for people to be able to understand all of this stuff. But it's something that I think we've done a reasonable job of. Okay, so on the other side, and things that I would do differently. I've got sort of ticking time bomb here, and this is think twice about exclusive deals. So I'm going to take you back to sort of March of 2010. And this is when we raised our first, it was our Series A. So it was about 850K. So at that time, we raised this money from this, it was a strategic investor called Iris. And Iris are very well known in the UK as providers of sort of traditional desktop accounting software. They've been around for literally decades. As you can see there, they have a kind of like very big sort of like market share. About 50% of the accountancy practices in the UK use a Iris product of some sort. And they were going to invest in the business, and it was quite a large amount of money for us, and it was a really good valuation at the time, so that was kind of great. But it was a strategic investment, so they were also going to be our route towards this market. And we'd identified the accountancy practice as a super important channel for our business. So this was like a complete win-win. It was going to be like amazing. And there's one kind of little small insignificant point in here. Was Iris would become the exclusive reseller for FreeAgent to the UK accountancy market. And we thought, well, that's fine. You know, like, who knows better how to sell software than somebody who's been doing it for 20 years and already has existing relationships with, 14,000 practices. And it turned out that didn't work out particularly well. And while that this particular partner, they had this big sales team and they had all these existing relationships, it soon became fairly apparent that they did not know how to sell SaaS software. They came from a generation and a legacy that was used to selling desktop software, and all their sales team, that's all they knew how to do. And their compensation, all their commission plans were built around the licensing model of desktop software. So for them to go from trying to sell that to trying to sell SaaS software, which is subscription, they just couldn't get their heads around it at all. And the result was it just didn't work. And that wouldn't have been a major problem if it wasn't for the fact that we'd signed a 3-year deal that said we were not allowed to approach any accountant in the UK by ourselves. And we had to wait for these guys to do it. And this was at a point in the sort of the UK sort of like online accountancy software sort of industry where things were really starting to take off. I mean, generally it's been a fairly sort of aggressive, buoyant market anyway, but this was a point where some of our competitors who were very, very well funded were aggressively going after this part of the market, and they were hiring their sales teams. They were really going. There was a big land sort of like grab kind of going on, and we basically had to sit there for 3 years while this strategic partner of ours essentially failed to deliver on what we were kind of like going to sort of hoping they were going to do. And after those kind of 3 years were up, and so in 2013, we were suddenly able to start our own sales team. That deal sort of expired. We could start building our sales team, and we could go after that market ourselves, and we did that. And it worked pretty well. Obviously we started growing our share of that, and we sort of aggressively went after that market, and that was kind of like fine. But we were definitely playing catch up by that point because we'd been sort of like sat on the sidelines for these 3 years. So if I could go over things again, that was definitely, but no matter how rosy something sort of like first appeared, you have to be very, very careful about the partnerships that you get into, because you've got to understand what the repercussions are, especially when there's some exclusivity involved in that. So that'd be the thing that would change. And the last one, well, this is about the money, and this is kind of a go big or go home. So looking back over the last sort of like 10 years or so, this is basically how sort of like FreeAgent's grown, right? So team size is the little dots, revenue, annualized revenue is the green bars. So you can see starting off in sort of like 2007, just the 3 of us, still the 3 of us in 2009, we still had full-time jobs at that point. And you can see how the kind of company's kind of grown since then, all the way up to where we are now, where it's probably about 150 people. And you can see how the revenue's kind of like grown alongside that to the point where we're kind of like over 10 million in revenue now. Now, if I start to lay over our investments that we took along that time, you can see we did our first seed round, sort of back end of 2008. That's when we kind of quit our jobs. Did another kind of seed round following on from that. We then did those Series A's, that one I was just talking about just now, the one in March, that 850K. We did a couple of debt rounds, which has actually worked out really well for us as a business. I kind of like highly recommend when your company gets to a level of scale, something that's really interesting. Topically enough, we did a crowdfunding round, so we raised about 1.1 million through seeders. And then we did the IPO in the end of 2016. And finally, the business was acquired for 53 million about sort of 3-4 months ago. But if you kind of like ignore the acquisition stuff, you look at what we kind of like actually raised as a business, it's not really that much money. It might seem like, it's like 50 million quid. I mean, it seems like all money. It's not really that much money as kind of like sort of like startups go, especially over like a 10-year lifespan. And if you think about that 8 million we raised in the IPO, a bunch of that went to paying off that 4 million in debt. So it wasn't even like all of that money came into the business anyway. And so, this is not like a huge amount of money sort of by standards today, and it's literally a fraction. It's like less than 10%, like far less than, maybe 1% of what our competitors have raised. And so this is what I kind of like think about, what would have happened if, back in this sort of like 2010, 2011, 12, what would we done like a really big raise at that point? What would we like, gone out with some crazy valuation and we'd raised sort of like 10 million and been incredibly aggressive in the market and just grown the team and sort of like throwing all the money against things. How would things have worked out? Our growth's been good, but could it have been better? Could it have been like sort of like 10x this? And so I kind of like think that with, knowing what I know now, I think that maybe that's kind of like what we should have done. But the other thing that I do know is that the growth that we've had has been good. I know we've been consistent and steady, and it's been sort of a year on year. And that's been a luxury in some regards, because the changes that have happened in our business, they've happened at a pace that's allowed, me personally, and I think like my two co-founders would say the same, it's allowed us to grow and it's allowed us to learn at a pace where it was manageable to some extent. It's not to say that, it's always been plain sailing, like far from it. But there's never been a time when things have just gone crazy overnight and we've had to hire 100 people and the wheels have totally fallen off everything and everybody's kind of like pissed off. And it's never been quite that level of chaos. And so, although I think maybe knowing what I know now, I could maybe sort of like think about going back and being a bit more aggressive. The fact that the business has grown at a pace which has allowed me to grow as an individual has actually been something that's been, I think, sort of quite valuable. And it's made that experience probably a bit more enjoyable and less sort of stressful. So that's the kind of like 3 things that I've learned. Thank you very much. So we are recruiting for pretty much everything. Specifically in sort of product side of things is where I'm kind of like most interested. So engineering, designer, kind of like research, product management. There's also some quite senior roles available, so if people are interested in those, kind of come and speak to me on the product side of things. But basically, if you work in this industry, we will probably have some sort of role that's suitable for you in a minute. Thank you.